It was a typical Tuesday morning in the bustling city of Millfield. The sun peeked through the clouds as people hurried to work and went about their daily routines. Amidst the morning rush, an unsuspecting man named Ethan Thompson walked briskly down Main Street, his mind preoccupied with the day ahead. Little did he know, his life was about to take a dramatic turn. As Ethan approached the corner of 5th and Main, the wail of police sirens pierced the air. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt beside him, and before he could process what was happening, officers leapt out and surrounded him. Confused and startled, Ethan put his hands up as the police aimed their weapons and barked orders for him to get on the ground. His heart raced as he complied, his face pressed against the cold concrete sidewalk. The officers quickly cuffed Ethan's hands behind his back and hauled him to his feet. As they pushed him into the back of a squad car, they gruffly informed him he was under arrest for a string of armed robberies that had occurred in the city over the past month. Ethan's protests of innocence fell on deaf ears as the car sped away towards the police station. At the precinct, Ethan was processed and thrown into a holding cell, still in a state of shocked disbelief. How could this be happening? He racked his brain but couldn't fathom how he could have been mistaken for an armed robber. He was a law-abiding citizen, a high school math teacher beloved by his students. This had to be some terrible misunderstanding. Hours ticked by as Ethan waited anxiously in the dank cell. Finally, a stone-faced detective arrived to interrogate him. Despite Ethan's desperate pleas and his airtight alibi of being in class teaching during the robberies, the detective remained unconvinced. The evidence seemed damning. Surveillance footage from the crime scenes showed a man who was a dead ringer for Ethan, down to the same clothes he was wearing today. Shell-shocked, Ethan was formally booked and arrangements were made to transfer him to county jail until his arraignment. As he sat on the cot in his cell, staring at the gray cinderblock walls, waves of panic and despair washed over him. How would he prove his innocence? Would anyone believe him? His thoughts spiraled to his students, his family, his reputation, all hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, the arresting officers couldn't help but feel pleased with themselves for apprehending the notorious Millfield robber. The suspect had been so brazen, going about his business in broad daylight as if he had nothing to fear. They were sure they had an open and shut case, until a bombshell discovery stopped them in their tracks. As the officers were filing their reports back at the station, combing through Ethan Thompson's background for their investigation, they came across a shocking revelation. Ethan Thompson wasn't just a mild-mannered math teacher, he had a secret past that no one could have imagined. Years ago, before moving to Millfield and building a quiet life as an educator, Ethan had been in the witness protection program. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Ethan Thompson wasn't the robber, but he had a doppelganger with far more nefarious intentions. The man they were really after was Ethan's estranged twin brother, Alexander, who Ethan had testified against years prior, landing him in prison. Alexander had recently been released and was clearly out for revenge, committing crimes while disguised as Ethan in a sinister attempt to frame him. The police hurried to retrieve Ethan from his cell, apologies spilling from their lips as they uncuffed him and explained the astonishing mix-up. Ethan's head spun. He hadn't seen or heard from his twin in years and had worked hard to put that chapter of his life behind him. Now it seemed his brother's vengeful scheme had nearly destroyed everything Ethan had built. As Ethan walked out of the police station a free man, he felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, relief at his exoneration tinged with dread over his brother's reappearance. The police assured him they would use all their resources to track down Alexander and bring him to justice. But Ethan knew his nightmare was far from over. With his dark past exposed and his vindictive twin on the loose, he faced an uncertain future, one that would test his strength and resilience like never before. The tale of the innocent man and his criminal twin was splashed across the front pages, shocking the people of Millfield. As the manhunt for Alexander intensified and Ethan struggled to pick up the pieces under the glare of unwanted publicity, one thing became clear: you can never truly outrun your past, no matter how deeply it's buried. Ethan's quiet life had been shattered, but through the ordeal, he found a resilience he never knew he possessed. He vowed to emerge stronger, forever changed by the day his two worlds collided. As the shock of his arrest and the revelation of his twin brother's scheme started to wear off, Ethan Thompson knew he couldn't just sit back and let the police handle everything. He was determined to take matters into his own hands and confront his estranged brother, Alexander, face to face. Ethan began by reaching out to old contacts from his past life, trying to gather any information he could about Alexander's whereabouts. It wasn't easy. He had worked hard to distance himself from that world, and many of his former associates were reluctant to get involved. But through persistence and a bit of luck, he finally caught a lead. Armed with a location, Ethan set out to confront his twin. He knew it would be risky. Alexander was clearly unstable and holding a major grudge. But Ethan felt he had no choice. He had to try to reason with his brother, to put an end to this destructive path of revenge before anyone else got hurt. When Ethan finally tracked Alexander down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, the tension was palpable. The brothers hadn't seen each other in years, not since Ethan had testified against Alexander, sending him to prison. Now, as they stood face to face, it was like looking in a twisted mirror. Alexander's eyes burned with resentment as he lashed out at Ethan, ranting about how he had ruined his life. Ethan tried to stay calm, to explain that he had done what he thought was right at the time. He had never wanted to turn against his own brother, but Alexander's crimes had left him no choice. But Alexander was beyond reason. In his mind, Ethan had betrayed him, and now it was time for payback. He revealed the depth of his vengeful plan. He wouldn't stop at just framing Ethan for robbery. He planned to systematically destroy every aspect of Ethan's life, to take away everything he held dear. Ethan realized with growing horror that his brother was truly lost to him now, consumed by bitterness and rage. He had no choice but to accept that the brother he once knew was gone. With a heavy heart, Ethan made the agonizing decision to turn Alexander over to the authorities once again. The police descended on the motel, and after a tense standoff, they apprehended Alexander. As he was led away in handcuffs, spewing venom and threats, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss and grief. Despite everything, Alexander was still his brother, his flesh and blood. Watching him self-destruct, drowning in his own anger and resentment, was almost more than Ethan could bear. In the aftermath, Ethan tried to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. It wasn't easy. The scars from his ordeal ran deep, both emotionally and in terms of his damaged reputation. But slowly, day by day, he began to rebuild. He found solace in his students, in their boundless enthusiasm for learning and their unwavering support. They couldn't care less about his past. To them, he was just Mr. Thompson, the best math teacher they'd ever had. Ethan poured himself into his teaching, finding a renewed sense of purpose in inspiring young minds. As time passed, the people of Millfield began to see Ethan for who he truly was, a good man who had been dealt a difficult hand but had faced it with strength and integrity. Whispers of respect and admiration began to eclipse the initial scandal and suspicion. Through it all, Ethan emerged a changed man. The experience had tested him in ways he never could have imagined, but it had also shown him the depths of his own resilience. He had confronted his past and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. As he looked to the future, Ethan knew that life would never be quite the same. But he also knew that he was stronger than he'd ever been. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, secure in the knowledge that he had already weathered the worst storm of his life and emerged standing tall. The tale of the innocent man and his criminal twin became a local legend in Millfield, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of second chances. And for Ethan Thompson, it was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel, if you have the courage to keep moving forward. Ethan Thompson thought he had put the worst behind him after his twin brother Alexander's arrest. He was slowly rebuilding his life and reputation in Millfield, focusing on his students and his teaching. But just as he was starting to find his footing again, a new twist in the case threatened to unravel everything. Alexander, ever the master manipulator, had managed to twist the narrative in his favor during his trial. He painted himself as the victim, a man wronged by his own brother, and cast doubt on Ethan's integrity. His clever machinations and charm swayed the jury, and to everyone's shock, Alexander was acquitted of all charges. Ethan was stunned. He had been so sure that justice would prevail, that his brother's crimes would finally catch up with him. But now, Alexander was a free man, and Ethan knew he would be coming for him with a vengeance. The first signs of trouble came in the form of threatening messages left on Ethan's voicemail. Alexander's voice, dripping with malice, promised that he would finish what he started. Ethan's every move was now haunted by the specter of his brother's revenge. Ethan knew he couldn't face this alone. He turned to the only people he could trust, his closest friends and colleagues at the school. They rallied around him, offering support and protection. They took turns walking him to and from his car, keeping an eye out for any sign of Alexander. But Alexander was clever. He started to sow seeds of doubt among the community, spreading rumors and lies about Ethan. He even went so far as to fabricate evidence, planting stolen items in Ethan's home and calling in anonymous tips to the police. Ethan found himself once again under suspicion, his hard-won trust and respect crumbling. Even some of his students began to look at him differently, whispering behind his back. It was like a nightmare déjà vu, and Ethan felt himself spiraling into despair. But Ethan's true friends never wavered. They stood by him, fighting to clear his name and expose Alexander's lies. It was a battle fought in the court of public opinion as much as in the halls of justice. The turning point came when one of Alexander's former associates, racked with guilt, came forward with the truth. He confessed to helping Alexander frame Ethan, and provided evidence of the elaborate scheme. It was the break Ethan needed, and the police launched a new investigation. This time, they dug deeper, uncovering the full extent of Alexander's deception. Piece by piece, the truth came out, the framing, the manipulation, the lies. Alexander's house of cards came tumbling down, and he found himself facing justice once more. In a dramatic courtroom showdown, Ethan faced his brother for what he hoped would be the last time. In a voice raw with emotion, he spoke of the pain Alexander had caused, the lives he had nearly ruined. But he also spoke of forgiveness, of the hope that Alexander could one day find the path to redemption. As Alexander was led away, this time to a prison cell with no hope of release, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It had been a long, painful journey, but he had emerged victorious, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of all those who knew him. The community of Millfield rallied around Ethan, apologizing for ever doubting him. His students, his true legacy, embraced him with renewed appreciation and respect. Ethan had been through the fire and come out stronger, a testament to the power of truth and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. As life in Millfield settled back into its familiar rhythms, Ethan knew that he would never forget the lessons he had learned. He had faced his deepest fears, confronted the darkest parts of his past, and emerged a better man for it. He had found, in the end, that the strength to overcome even the most daunting challenges lies within us all. Ethan looked to the future with hope and determination, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. He had lost a brother but gained a deeper understanding of himself and the unshakable support of a community that had become his true family. And that, he knew, was the most precious gift of all. The story of Ethan Thompson and his twin brother became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of anger and the redeeming force of love and forgiveness. And for Ethan, it was a chapter closed and a new beginning, a chance to live life on his own terms, unburdened by the shadows of the past. With his name cleared and his brother behind bars, Ethan Thompson thought he could finally put the past to rest. He settled back into his quiet life as a beloved math teacher, focusing on his students and the community that had stood by him through his darkest hours. But fate, it seemed, had one more twist in store. It began with a letter, delivered to Ethan's doorstep with no return address. Inside was a single cryptic message: "I know what you did." At first, Ethan dismissed it as a prank, a tasteless joke from someone seeking to stir up old troubles. But then more letters came, each more threatening than the last. Someone, it seemed, was not content to let the past stay buried. They hinted at dark secrets from Ethan's history, things he thought were long forgotten. They demanded money, threatening to expose Ethan's alleged misdeeds if he didn't comply. Ethan was at a loss. He had no idea who could be behind this new harassment or what they could possibly know about him. He had always strived to live an honest life, even in the face of his brother's crimes. But doubt began to creep in. Was there something he had overlooked? Some mistake from his past coming back to haunt him? Desperate for answers, Ethan turned to the one person he thought might be able to help, his old friend and confidant, Lucy. Lucy was a private investigator, skilled at uncovering the truth. If anyone could get to the bottom of this mystery, it was her. Lucy took on the case with gusto, determined to help Ethan put an end to this new nightmare. She pored over the threatening letters, tracing them back to their source. What she uncovered was a web of deceit more tangled than anyone could have imagined. The person behind the letters was none other than Olivia, Alexander's former girlfriend. She had been quietly biding her time, nursing a grudge against Ethan for his role in sending Alexander to prison. Now, with Alexander locked away, she had decided to take her revenge. But Olivia's plan went beyond simple extortion. As Lucy dug deeper, she discovered that Olivia had been carefully planting false evidence, weaving a narrative that would paint Ethan as the true mastermind behind his brother's crimes. She was determined to destroy Ethan's life, just as she believed he had destroyed hers. Ethan was stunned by the revelation. He had never even met Olivia, yet she had been working in the shadows to ruin him. It was a chilling reminder of how far the ripples of his brother's actions could reach. With Lucy's help, Ethan set out to confront Olivia and put a stop to her scheme. They arranged a meeting, luring her out with the promise of the payoff she had been demanding. But when Olivia arrived, she found herself facing not just Ethan, but the police as well. Lucy had gathered enough evidence to expose Olivia's plot, and the authorities were quick to take her into custody. As she was led away, screaming threats and profanities, Ethan could only feel a sense of pity. Olivia had allowed herself to be consumed by the same anger and resentment that had driven Alexander, and it had led her down the same dark path. With Olivia's arrest, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Ethan was truly free, free from his brother's shadow, free from the specter of his past. He had emerged from this final trial stronger and wiser, with a renewed appreciation for the power of truth and the importance of the bonds we forge with others. As Ethan looked around at the faces of his friends, his students, his community, he knew that he was rich in the ways that truly mattered. He had been tested by fire and emerged not just unscathed, but refined. He was ready to face whatever the future held, secure in the knowledge that he would never have to face it alone. The story of Ethan Thompson and the twin shadows that had haunted his life became a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always hope, always a way forward. And for Ethan, it was a chance to start anew, to build a life defined not by the challenges he had faced, but by the unbreakable bonds he had forged and the unshakable sense of self he had found along the way. With the arrest of Olivia, Ethan Thompson had hoped to close the book on the dark chapters of his life. He had weathered storms that would have broken a lesser man and emerged with a strength and resilience he never knew he possessed. But just as he was settling into a new normal, a figure from his past resurfaced, bringing with it a revelation that would shake Ethan to his core. The figure was Maria, Alexander's ex-wife. She had been a peripheral character in the twins' lives, having married Alexander during one of his brief periods of freedom. Their marriage had been short-lived, crumbling under the weight of Alexander's criminal activities and erratic behavior. Maria had filed for divorce and disappeared from Millfield, seeking to put her troubled past behind her. Now, years later, Maria had returned, seeking out Ethan with a startling confession. During their brief marriage, she and Alexander had had a child, a daughter named Lily. And in a twist of fate that seemed almost too cruel to be true, Maria had recently discovered that Lily was not Alexander's child at all. She was Ethan's. The news hit Ethan like a thunderbolt. He had never even known of Lily's existence, let alone that he could be her father. Maria explained that it had happened during a period when Alexander and Ethan's lives had been inextricably intertwined, when the boundaries between them had blurred. It had been a single night of misguided comfort-seeking that Maria had always regretted, but it had resulted in the greatest gift of her life, Lily. Ethan was reeling. The idea of being a father, of having a child out there in the world, was overwhelming. But as the initial shock wore off, a new feeling took its place, a fierce, protective love for this child he had never met. He knew he had to meet her, to forge a connection with this unexpected piece of his heart. Maria agreed, and a meeting was arranged. When Ethan laid eyes on Lily for the first time, it was like looking at a mirror of his own past. She had his eyes, his smile. But she also had a light, a purity, that was entirely her own. The meeting was emotional, filled with tears and laughter and long overdue embraces. Lily, who had grown up believing Alexander was her father, was understandably confused and overwhelmed. But she was also curious, eager to know this man who was her true biological father. Ethan knew he had a long road ahead of him, a delicate balance to strike. He wanted to be a part of Lily's life, but he also respected the fact that she had a life and a family of her own. He didn't want to disrupt that, only to enhance it in whatever way he could. With Maria's blessing, Ethan began to build a relationship with his daughter. It started with small things, weekly phone calls, emails exchanging photos and stories. Then came visits, day trips to the park or the museum. Slowly, tentatively, a bond began to form. For Ethan, it was a joy he had never known, a love he had never expected to find. In Lily, he found not just a daughter, but a reflection of the best parts of himself. She was a reminder that even from the darkest chapters of our lives, something beautiful can emerge. As the years passed, Ethan's relationship with Lily grew and deepened. She became a regular fixture in his life, a beloved part of his world. And through her, Ethan found a new purpose, a new reason to strive to be the best version of himself. The story of Ethan Thompson had come full circle, from a man haunted by the shadows of his past to a father illuminated by the light of his child. It was a journey of redemption, of forgiveness, of the transformative power of love. And as Ethan looked to the future, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with a full and grateful heart. For he had finally found what he had been seeking all along, not just peace, but wholeness. A sense of belonging, of family, of home. And that, he knew, was the greatest victory of all. As Ethan Thompson embraced his new role as a father, he found himself looking at the world through fresh eyes. Lily had brought a new perspective, a new joy into his life. But she had also brought questions about his own past and the secrets he had kept buried for so long. One evening, as Ethan was tucking Lily into bed during one of her visits, she asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. "Daddy," she said, her young face serious, "why don't I have any grandparents?" Ethan's heart clenched. It was a question he had always known would come, but one he had never quite known how to answer. The truth was, Ethan's own childhood was a mystery, even to himself. He had no memories of his parents, no understanding of where he and Alexander had come from. Ethan had always assumed that their parents had died when the twins were very young. It was the only explanation that made sense, given that they had grown up in a series of foster homes and institutions. But now, faced with his daughter's innocent question, Ethan realized that he had never actually sought the truth. He had been content to let that part of his history remain in shadow. But Lily deserved answers. And more than that, Ethan realized, he needed answers for himself. It was time to confront the final mystery of his past, to fill in the blanks of his own story. Ethan began to dig, to search for any clues about his and Alexander's origins. It was a daunting task. Records from their early years were scarce and often incomplete. But Ethan was determined. He spent long hours in libraries and archives, chasing down leads and hunting for documents. Slowly, piece by painstaking piece, a picture began to emerge. Ethan discovered that his parents hadn't died when he and Alexander were young. In fact, they had given the twins up for adoption shortly after their birth. But why? What had driven them to such a heartbreaking decision? Further investigation revealed a tragic story. Ethan's parents had been young, too young perhaps to handle the challenge of raising twins. They had struggled financially and emotionally, and ultimately, they had felt that they couldn't provide the life they wanted for their sons. They had made the agonizing choice to give them up, hoping that they would find a better life elsewhere. For Ethan, it was a revelation that brought both pain and a strange sense of peace. He had spent so much of his life feeling untethered, disconnected from his roots. Now, at last, he understood why. But he also understood the depth of his parents' love, the sacrifice they had made in the hopes of giving their children a brighter future. Armed with this new understanding, Ethan made a decision. He would find his birth parents, not to confront them or to demand explanations, but to let them know that he understood. That he forgave them. And that, in spite of everything, he had found his way to a good life. It took months of searching, but eventually, Ethan located his birth mother. She was living in a small town, hundreds of miles away from Millfield. When Ethan reached out to her, she was shocked and overjoyed. She had never stopped thinking about her sons, never stopped hoping that they had found happiness. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears of joy and regret. Ethan's mother was thrilled to meet Lily, to see the wonderful granddaughter she had never known she had. And for Ethan, it was a chance to fill in the final pieces of his history, to understand at last where he came from and why his life had taken the turns it had. In the end, Ethan's journey had brought him full circle. He had confronted the shadows of his past and emerged into the light. He had found love, both in his daughter and in his rediscovered family. And he had found, at long last, a sense of wholeness, a sense of belonging. As Ethan looked to the future, he knew that he was ready for whatever lay ahead. He had the strength of his convictions, the love of his family, and the wisdom gained from a life fully lived. He was, in every sense, home. The story of Ethan Thompson was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It was a reminder that our pasts do not define us, that there is always a chance for redemption, for healing, for love. And it was a celebration of the bonds of family, the ties that bind us to our histories and to each other, and the stories we weave together as we navigate the winding path of life. As Ethan Thompson settled into his new life, embracing his roles as a father, a son, and a teacher, he thought his days of surprises and revelations were behind him. But life, as he had come to learn, was never quite done with its twists and turns. It began with a phone call from an old friend, someone Ethan hadn't spoken to in years. James had been one of Ethan's closest confidants back in his early days of teaching, but they had drifted apart over time, as friends sometimes do. Now, out of the blue, James was reaching out, insisting that he needed to see Ethan, that he had something important to share. Intrigued and a little concerned, Ethan agreed to meet. When he saw James, he was struck by how much his friend had changed. There was a weariness in his eyes, a weight on his shoulders that hadn't been there before. But there was also a determination, a sense of purpose that Ethan recognized all too well. Over coffee, James began to talk, and as he did, Ethan felt a growing sense of astonishment. James, it turned out, had been working on a book, a memoir of sorts. But it wasn't just any memoir. It was the story of their town, of Millfield, and the dark secrets that had been buried there for far too long. James had uncovered a web of corruption and deceit that stretched back decades, involving some of the town's most prominent figures. There were tales of bribes and backroom deals, of cover-ups and conspiracies. And at the heart of it all was a name that made Ethan's blood run cold: Alexander Thompson. Ethan's twin, it seemed, had been more than just a troubled individual. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, a game that had destroyed lives and shattered families. And now, James was determined to bring the truth to light, to hold those responsible accountable. Ethan was reeling. He had thought he had put the ghosts of his past to rest, but now they were rising again, threatening to engulf not just him, but the entire town he called home. He knew he had a choice to make. He could turn away, could retreat back into the safety of his quiet life. Or he could stand with James, could fight for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. In the end, there was no choice at all. Ethan had spent too long running from his past, too long letting others dictate his story. It was time to take a stand, to fight for what was right, not just for himself, but for his daughter, for his students, for everyone who called Millfield home. Together, Ethan and James began to unravel the tangled web of secrets and lies. They faced threats and intimidation, attempts to silence them and stop their investigation. But they persevered, driven by a shared commitment to the truth and to justice. Slowly, painfully, the story began to emerge. The depth of the corruption was staggering, implicating people at the highest levels of power. There were those who had profited from Alexander's crimes, who had used him as a scapegoat and a patsy. There were those who had covered up the truth, who had let innocent people suffer to protect their own interests. It was a story that rocked Millfield to its core. There were trials and hearings, shocking revelations, and long overdue reckonings. Through it all, Ethan and James remained at the forefront, the voices of truth in a town that had been built on secrets and lies. In the end, justice was served. The guilty were punished, the innocent vindicated. And Millfield began the long, slow process of healing, of rebuilding trust and community. For Ethan, it was a bittersweet victory. He had helped to right wrongs, to bring the truth to light. But he had also been forced to confront the darkest parts of his past, to relive the pain and trauma he had worked so hard to overcome. Yet as he stood with his daughter, with his students, with all those he loved and who loved him, Ethan knew that he had made the right choice. He had faced his demons and emerged stronger, more whole than ever before. The story of Ethan Thompson and the town of Millfield was one that would be told for generations. It was a story of courage and resilience, of the power of truth to shine a light in the darkest of places. And it was a reminder that, in the end, we are all connected, all part of a shared story that is still being written, page by page, day by day. In the aftermath of the revelations that had shaken Millfield to its core, Ethan Thompson found himself at the center of a new chapter in the town's history. With the truth finally exposed and the guilty parties brought to justice, the community was left to grapple with the fallout, to try to make sense of the betrayals and the lies that had shaped their lives for so long. For Ethan, it was a time of reflection and healing. He had faced his demons, had confronted the darkest parts of his past and emerged victorious. But he knew that the scars would never fully fade, that the memories of all he had endured would always be a part of him. As he watched Lily grow and thrive, as he saw the impact he was making in the lives of his students, Ethan began to understand that his story, for all its twists and turns, had led him exactly where he was meant to be. He had found his purpose, his calling, in being a guide and a mentor, in helping others navigate the challenges and triumphs of life. And so, even as Millfield struggled to find its way forward, Ethan became a beacon of hope and resilience. He was there for his students, offering guidance and support as they grappled with the revelations that had turned their world upside down. He was there for his colleagues, working tirelessly to rebuild trust and foster a new sense of community within the school. But Ethan's influence didn't stop at the schoolyard gates. As the story of Millfield's dark past and its hard-won redemption spread, Ethan found himself being sought out by others, by people from all walks of life who had been touched by his journey. He became a speaker, a writer, a voice for change and healing in a world that often seemed so broken. Through it all, Ethan remained grounded in the love of his family, in the unbreakable bond he shared with Lily and with his rediscovered parents. They were his anchor, his reminder of what truly mattered in life. And as he watched Lily grow into a young woman, as he saw the seeds of compassion and strength he had planted in her begin to bloom, Ethan knew that his legacy would live on long after he was gone. Years passed, and Millfield continued to change and grow. The old wounds began to heal, and a new generation emerged, unburdened by the secrets of the past. And at the heart of it all was Ethan Thompson, the man who had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, who had shown a town and a world that redemption was always possible. As Ethan looked back on his life, on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment, he felt a sense of profound gratitude. For all the pain and the struggle, for all the times he had felt lost and alone, he had always been guided by a higher purpose, by a sense of destiny that had led him to exactly where he needed to be. And so, as he sat in his old classroom, surrounded by the faces of the students he had taught and the colleagues he had mentored, Ethan knew that his story was far from over. There were more lives to touch, more lessons to learn and to teach. And he was ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that he had the strength and the wisdom to face it all. The story of Ethan Thompson was more than just a tale of one man's journey. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of love and truth to conquer even the darkest of times. And it was a reminder that, no matter how lost we may feel, no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always a way forward, always a light waiting to guide us home. In the end, Ethan's legacy was one of hope, of the unshakable belief that we all have within us the power to change our stories, to shape our destinies. And as his story spread, as it touched hearts and minds across the world, it became a beacon, a guiding light for all those who had ever felt alone or afraid, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. As the years turned into decades, Ethan Thompson's story became the stuff of legend in Millfield. His name was spoken with reverence, his legacy celebrated as a shining example of the power of resilience, compassion, and hope. And while Ethan himself remained humble, ever focused on the work of guiding and mentoring the next generation, he could not escape the profound impact he had made. In his later years, Ethan found himself reflecting more and more on the winding path that had brought him to this point. He marveled at the way life's most painful challenges had often held within them the seeds of his greatest triumphs, at the way every struggle had taught him a new lesson, had made him stronger and wiser. He thought of Alexander, his troubled twin, and the dark shadow he had cast over Ethan's life for so long. But even in those painful memories, Ethan found a measure of peace. He had come to understand that Alexander's story, for all its darkness, was also a part of his own, a reminder of the thin line that separates light from shadow, and the constant work required to choose the right path. He thought of Lily, his beloved daughter, now a woman grown with children of her own. She had been his saving grace, his reason for fighting when all had seemed lost. And as he watched her navigate the challenges of her own life with grace and strength, Ethan knew that his greatest legacy would always be the love and the lessons he had passed on to her. And he thought of Millfield, the town that had shaped him, that had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. It had been a crucible, a place of both darkness and light. But through it all, the spirit of the community had endured, had grown stronger in the face of every challenge. In his final days, surrounded by the love of his family and the respect of a community that had become his own, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. He had lived a life of purpose, had touched countless lives and left the world a better place than he had found it. And while he knew that his work was not finished, that there would always be more to do, more to learn, he was ready to pass the torch to the next generation. On a crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned golden and the sun cast a warm glow over the streets of Millfield, Ethan Thompson took his last breath. And while his passing was mourned by all who had known and loved him, there was also a sense of celebration, a recognition of a life well lived and a legacy that would endure. For in the end, Ethan's story was not just his own. It was the story of us all, of the challenges we face and the choices we make, of the unbreakable bonds of love and community that sustain us through even the darkest of times. And as his memory lived on, as his lessons continued to inspire and guide, Ethan Thompson's spirit remained a beacon, a reminder of the incredible power within us all to shape our own destinies and to leave the world a brighter place. Years turned to generations, and still the story was told, passed down from parent to child as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. And while the details may have changed with each telling, the core of the tale remained the same, that in a world often shadowed by darkness, there would always be those who chose to light the way, to fight for truth and justice and hope, no matter the cost. And so, as the sun set on Millfield and the stars emerged to cast their gentle light, the story of Ethan Thompson lived on, a reminder and a promise that, even in our darkest hours, we are never truly alone, and that the power to change our world for the better lies always within our grasp, waiting only for us to reach out and seize it. The end.